Thank you so much for joining us this evening for tonight's program. I'm Christina Linden. I'm the Director of Academic and Public Programs here at the Cantor Art Center at Stanford University. And before we continue, I'd like to acknowledge that Stanford sits on the ancestral land of the Mwekme Ohlone tribe. I'm going to play Stanford's land acknowledgement video.
Stanford sits on the ancestral lands of the Mwekme Ohlone tribe.
This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people.
Consistent with our values of community and inclusion,
We have a responsibility to acknowledge, honor, and make visible
the university's relationship to Native peoples.
Tonight, we are delighted to welcome Gabi Ngcobo as the 2023 Ruth K. Franklin Lecture on the Arts of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas. Gabi is an artist, educator, and currently works as a curatorial director of the Javett Art Centre at the University of Pretoria. She will be taking on a new position as the director of the Kunstinstituut Meli in Rotterdam in 2024. Since the early 2000s, Gabi has been engaged in collaborative artistic, curatorial, and educational projects in South Africa and on an international scope. Recent curatorial projects include The Show is Over at the South London Gallery, The Tea is Silent at the Museum Dhondt-Dhaenens in Belgium, SCENORAMA and Handle with Care, both at the Javett Art Centre, and Mating Birds Vol.2 at the KZNSA Gallery in Durban, South Africa. In 2018, she curatorially directed the 10th Berlin Biennale, titled We Don't Need Another Hero, and was one of the co-curators of the 32nd Sao Paulo Bienal, titled Incenteza Viva. She is the founding member of the Johannesburg-based collaborative platforms NGO, Nothing Gets Organized, and the Center for Historical Reenactments. Gabi's writings have been published in various platforms, including Shooting Down Babylon, the Tracy Rose Retrospective at Zeitz Mocha in Cape Town, Uneven Bodies at the Govett Brewster Art Gallery in New Zealand, The Stronger We Become, the catalog of the South African Pavilion for the 2019 Venice Biennale, and We Are Many, Art of the Political and Multiple Truths for Texte zur Kunst. We gratefully acknowledge support from the Franklin Lecture Fund, and I thank you for joining me and welcoming Gabi.
Good evening. Sanbona. Thank you very much, Christina, for your generous invitation and introduction. My English is still traveling. And thanks to all who have made this event possible, and to all of you who are present tonight. Welcome. So my talk tonight is positioned adjacent to Sabelo Mlangeni's exhibition, which is here at Cantor Art Centre, titled Imvuselelo, or a revival in English. One might ask, what exactly is being revived here? And I suspect that there's no clear answer to that. What we know is that things fundamental to our being have been lost, stripped away, discarded, hidden, or remixed. And these acts of violence have been rooted in spiritual warfares committed over centuries and continue into the present. At this point, I'd like to read the quote that is on the screen, which is by Santu Mofokeng. I grew up in the threshold floor of faith, a faith that is both ritual and spiritual, a bizarre cocktail of beliefs that completely embraces pagan rituals as well as Christian beliefs. And while I feel reluctant to partake in this gossamer world, I can identify with it. It does not strike me as peculiar, yet I still try to avoid being trapped in its hypnotic embrace, which seems to mock my carefully cultivated indifference and self-confidence. I feel ambivalent about my ambivalence, embarrassed by my embarrassment. I begin with this quote from late Santu Mofokeng, who was also a maker of photographs, an artist, a writer, because I think it is a powerful understanding of a journey that is no longer rooted in anger, but one that shows that the calls and responses, the retrievals of what has been lost are not a straightforward journey. That we will only know the journey once we have traveled it. Our spiritual technologies are rooted in improvisation. Like Miles Davis once said, I'll play it first, I'll tell you what it is later. Santu Mofokeng's photographic series titled Chasing Shadows from 1996 to 2016 was made at the sacred Motuleng Caves, which translates as the place of the beating drums, located in the Free State province of South Africa. The series allows a view into this gossamer world he speaks of, a place of shadows that he unveils for us as a fragile constellation of entangled and hazy realms that fluctuate between what we know as reality and the spiritual unknowns. This is a reason that in practice, in my practice, I work towards avoiding certain terms from my vocabulary, so as to practice not working with anger as a source, to not enter or to avoid entering the space of violence, but rather focus on journeys of revival where hopefully there's joy. I wish to be able to attend to spiritual technologies that we employ as a way towards repair or healing, that historically kept us in connection with the land, for example, our tongues, our dreams, and other rituals of self-preservation. I'm interested in these within the space of collective study and thinking about collaborations within and beyond formal pedagogical practices. It is clear to many of us that formal education can be both transformative and limiting, especially with regards to forms of knowledge production that are rooted in the spiritual. For South African jazz pianist Nduduzo Makhathini, who recently completed his PhD study titled Breaking into Sound, Dislocating Ndu Cosmology and Improvisation in South African Jazz, the fact, I quote from him, the fact that there is no current citation system to cite from dreams as a valid source of knowledge, while people living in bracket South Africa continue to take seriously that which is revealed in dreams is telling of the current academic regime and the failure to enter a pluriverse. He continues, I want to suggest that there is an urgent need to create another layer of literature that can count as terrestrial or celestial literature. And that would allow scholars writing in this paradigm to incorporate the direct words of an ancestor from a dream. This would lead to different conversations surrounding examination or peer review in scholarship, conversations that could employ divination as a peer review method, or a sangoma as a reader or examiner of a dissertation. A sangoma is a Zulu word for a traditional healer. For Fred Morton, improvisation is a response to a necessity to act in favor of freedom. The freedom not to have to describe what we do not yet know, the freedom to not stop searching. Describing the images from forming part of the Chasing Shadows series, Santu has said that the images record rituals, fetishes, and settings. He continues to say, I'm not certain that I captured on film the essence of the consciousness I saw displayed. Perhaps I was looking for something that refuses to be photographed. I was only chasing shadows, perhaps. Close quote. The doubt in the statement, for me, is integral to a process of healing, revival, and retrieval. It keeps us vulnerable and therefore open to learning anew. Doubt necessitates that we do not fetishize the spiritual technologies we uncover or rediscover. Doubt is beautiful. It leads to improvisation. It is humming in sync with a sound previously unknown, yet deeply felt. For Makhathini, improvisation could be understood as a form of ritual overlapping between physical and metaphysical planes, a process he understands as the breaking into sound, engaging with what he calls the elsewhere. These are some of the thoughts that also inform my curatorial investigations and practices, which I think of as understanding or understand as slang. Jazz is also slang. It is a spirit, it is spirit and energy. In my practice, I like to begin by thinking about drawing in the extended sense. Drawing people together, drawing from gaps of history, drawing cartographies of the future. Jazz is critical in this because it wobbles the frame of history. In my practice, together with others, I have always embraced the question of how we can create unexpected moments of learning, as well as create those that are orchestrated and yet remain open to broader interpretation. For example, in 2008, I collectively put together an exhibition titled Scratching the Surface, Volume 1, within a short-lived collective known as Manje Manje Projects. In this project, we focus on practices driven by a desire to obliterate, to render opaque, reveal, satisfy, and itch, mark or locate, damage, especially the obsolete, make contact between surfaces, walls, land, skin, etc. There's never been a need or idea to create volume 2 of Scratching the Surface. Through my collaborative engagement, we tended to rather suggest serial experiences as a way of embracing a continuity that can take different forms, starting from anywhere between teaching, working curatorially, writing strategically, writing, strategically planning, experimenting through platforms organized as pseudo institutions, such as the Center for Historical Reenactments and NGO, Nothing Gets Organized, working with available resources and welcoming the power of money without being disempowered by it. These are commitments I continue to embrace. At Javett-UP, I recently curated a project that was mentioned by Christina in the introduction. God. The project SCENORAMA, I conceived it with my colleagues at Javett-UP, and it became another testing ground for the development of artistic and collaborative forms. We invited South African artist, Zara Julius, who describes herself as an interdisciplinary artist, researcher, and vinyl selector and DJ. Zara's practice is informed by a working methodology of rapture and is concerned with the relationship between performativity, frequency, concealment, and fugitivity in the settler post-colonies. She works with sound, video, performance, and objects. She collects, selects, collages, and creates archives, real archives, imagined archives, and embodied archives through extensive research projects. She is especially engaged in thinking through the internal workings of the Black Sonic. This work on the screen, which is titled Oceanic Breath, Zara maps out networks and associations of Blackness beginning from the African continent to the Caribbean, to the Americas, and back to Africa in ways that have been difficult to imagine. She does this by scratching onto a surface of mirrors, considering the ocean space and the waters at large as a space of shared memory. Through what she calls feedback loop across localities, Zara is able to help us think about the movement of sonic experiments and experiences across time and geographies. Her research does what is often difficult to activate, staying home whilst traversing and making connections that evidence the cycle of history from slavery and colonialism and anti-enslavement resistances in the Caribbean, Haiti in particular, and the Americas, as well as anti-colonial struggles in Africa. In her MA thesis, completed in 2021, titled Sounding Spiritual Technologies as Marronage, Zara considers marronage as an idea of freedom. Freedom not as a destination, but an ongoing praxis that is generated through a beingness that we come to know jointly. I'm going to play a video and then disappear for a little bit, come back. This video is by Zara Julius, which is it's titled Maroon's Time, in which Zara engaged with Vusi, who is a man who's part of the jazz social cultures of Tshwane or Pretoria, a place considered the capital of jazz in South Africa. She filmed Vusi moving to the sound of a composition by Andile Yenana titled Tembisa, which is an area in Gauteng in the East Rand. Another title of the track is The People, and it's from 2002. I'll continue speaking about the project SCENORAMA, in which basically we took two words, scene and panorama, in order to attempt this kind of mapping of belief systems across geographies that are connected to especially the African diasporic experiences. I continue with work that was part of SCENORAMA of the artist Oscar Murillo, who contributed with these three paintings that emerged from the Frequencies project, which is a research project initiated a decade ago, involving forming relationships with schools all over the world and stretching blank canvases onto school desks, leaving them on for a period of about 6 months. The children are aged 10 and 16, and they stay with these canvases, they doodle on the canvases, they live their feelings, their future hopes, and respond to popular culture in almost similar ways, even when separated by physical distances. In Disrupted Frequencies, he repurposes these youthful interpretations by stitching together pieces of canvas from different countries, then directly working onto the surface with oil paint. By bringing together these emotive spaces, he consciously creates friction and a sense of likeness. The title of each painting contains the names of the countries that the component canvases originate from, giving light to different geographic origins and social context of each canvas. The paint strokes feature varying shades of blue that embody a dance of field of blue wave-like formations that flood the surface of the canvas, obscuring and revealing the original mark making, recalling the blue ocean whose flows connect and separate us. Here you see a work, two works, one in the background by Luana Vitra, titled Transformation is a Dodge, created in response to Brazilian politics and histories, especially those that connect to industry, capitalism, and colonialism, and how these are expressions of the harvesting of the natural force of matter in order to transform it into labor force. Luana comes from a mineral-rich part of Brazil, Minas Gerais. So she works with this landscape and thinks through it. For example, she likens the process of galvanization to whitening, rust to memory, ruin to freedom, and electrolysis to memory sharing. Interestingly, both Luana and Paulo Nazareth come from the same region. Paulo Nazareth is the work is the bricks installation, which was inserted with maize crops that are not so visible in this image. And it's called Maize, but titled M-A-Z-E. Paulo's main practice is composed of walking long distances across countries in different continents. Maize is an installation of bricks and maize, a crop that has become staple in many parts of Africa, originating from Central America, and has been used to disappear indigenous crops and contributing to how these crops are connected to understanding of self, even future selves, and local cosmologies. We also, I don't have this image here, we also planted some 49 crops of the maize, but especially ones that come from Mexico in an installation also that was titled Maize, but spelled M-A-I-Z-E. I think this painting by Nyaku Mashilo, South African artist, it's titled Ditapelo tsa Bomme, which means the prayers of our mothers. It's quite interesting in thinking also about Santu Mofokeng in his relationship to how he thinks about land and space. It draws on inspiration from photographic archives, including the image of Santu Mofokeng that I shared earlier. In order to build expansive scenes where imagined representatives of Blackness migrate through abstract liminal spaces. These scenes act as celestial cartographies, connecting the depicted Black figures through a felt mutuality of heritage, spirituality, shared ritual, and intent. These migratory figures, forever moving between and through, are driven by an energetic pull towards a new vanguard where purpose and representation can be renegotiated. This particular figure, as I've said, maybe I'll go back to that image later, of chasing shadows in the caves of Motolong. Then I want to talk about this work by Nolan Oswald Dennis. Within SCENORAMA, there were different kind of configurations of support and collaboration that were taking place, and relationships that I'd formed prior to my work at Javett-UP, that I also drew in to create this idea of a collaborative but also an interdisciplinary space. I'm one of the curators of Common Places, which is a project by Insight, an organization that has been around for more than 30 years, operating in the border of Mexico and the US, San Diego and Tijuana. And this time around, the curator, Andrea Torrebranca, invited myself and Miguel Lopez in Peru, Lima, to be the co-curators of the exhibition, but not really going to the States or Mexico, but working in our localities, which I thought was an interesting invitation, which came in also in the midst of the pandemic. But also at a time where one became so much more aware of kind of how much tiring and sometimes energy draining these travels that we often do can do to our psyche as well, and the environment. This is a project that then is part of this commission. I invited 2 artists, but then I invited them also within the project SCENORAMA, which meant that the project were fully supported by a project Common Places. And this project was interesting for me, was really also to think about the Javett Art Centre as a space for continuity, but also art centers in South Africa have an interesting history because there were places for people to grow from, and especially those that were taking place in the townships. Started by artists and becoming also refuge for a lot of people. So I wanted to see, what does an art center within or adjacent to the university, what can it achieve in activating a space that is alive, also that can be seen as a living school, because there's a lot of students that come through. I also wanted to invite the artist to SCENORAMA, not with a project that was already fully fledged, but one that was still under consideration. So both projects kind of start in the space of the unknown, and then they kind of grow through conversations with people within the university, but also with other artists working in different parts of the country or the continent or the world. The project by Nolan is titled Isivivane, Superpositions, and is a geopoetic gesture that emerges from a desire to restage the planetary intimacies promised by geological museums in psychospiritual context where no such intimacy is possible. Superposition is the term used by geologists to describe a vertical conception of time. In geological terms, depth is a measure of duration. Going down is a movement through space and into time. A superposition is also the act of placing one thing on top of another. The accumulation of rocks and other material is therefore also an accumulation time and other immaterial. For Nolan, land is an anti-system where time becomes space or promise to become. Nolan frames these geopoetics with a history of landlessness, a condition of surviving with absence, a tradition of creating intimacy where none is possible, and a program for carrying impossibility. Here you can see Nolan coming in. We closed on Mondays, and so the artists will come and use the gallery space as a studio, developing these projects. Isivivane is the isiZulu word meaning cairn, a pile of stones marking a significant point in the landscape. It is also the word for making a contribution, working together. This work uses geology as a portal for connecting absence and possibility. We can reach across the void and touch, if not the actual world, then the promise of a world in which our intimacies become, Inspired by an idea of the distribution of digital reproductions of rocks in geology collections to people who have no access to museums, which is a conversation that Nolan had with the curator of geology at University of Pretoria, where the Javett-UP is located. Her name is Vusani Matada. We read this gesture as a double negation, where a desire for a material relationship to the planet, for example, the access to rock samples, is met by the simulation of a material relation, digital scans of rocks. Surprisingly, this double absence offers us a grammar for relations to land beyond the horizon of alienation. The rematerialization of digital scan via 3D printing performs an objectification of absence, or the promise of a relation where none is possible. In this image, the project SCENORAMA was already open to the public, although we did not have an opening. And here you see also the beginnings of a work by Nyagalo, who also I was working with Insights and Commonplaces. Still working with Insights and Commonplaces. Nyagalo's project is titled "The Things We Made for the Things That We Did Not Know." And according to the artist, it's a manuscript for drawings and other obsessions that can be shuffled. It is a process that is rooted in drawing, from which a compilation of objects, sounds, photographs continue to be produced. This project began its process through a set of personal and collective engagements that are hypothetical and that will be articulated via collaborations with other artists, alternative objects, merchandise, and multiple disciplines. The work is partly rooted in a process of thinking in reverse, tracing backwards. the things that we made for the things that we did not know. It is proposing questions, or rather statements, such as the things that we made for joy, the things that we didn't know about language, the things that we made for pleasure, and the things we made for when we moved. This work is centered around particular keywords that continue to influence the thinking pattern, the artist's thinking pattern about drawing, space, materiality, migration, language, improvisation, ongoing elements that contribute to objects, words, belongings, and other obsessions that are carriers of knowledge. There are drawings, the series is titled Drawings That Are Already in the World. So they're kind of created from an archive of images that is online, and kind of depicts burial rituals in South Africa, but also in other parts of the Black world. I just wanted to point them in the space of the exhibition. And here you see the maize crops that are distributed throughout this maze. And this is a branch. This project that I'm doing with Nolan and Nyagalo is titled Reverse Forward and All at Once. And this was one of the activations of both of these projects within the space with invited people. And through our collaboration and in conversations with the engineering department at University of Pretoria, because Nyagalo has always imagined that the project will become a conveyor belt. But it ended up being a kind of a train track because we didn't have the mechanisms to create a conveyor belt. But I think it's even more interesting in that way. So when the conveyor belt came through, the project also changed in the space. And this is the time before. And this was the installation of the track. And so the project continues. This was a few days ago and currently. So we installed the project at NGO, Nothing Gets Organized. We had the the team, or the Michael Kitchman and Carmen Koeka from Insights visiting Johannesburg or South Africa. And we thought to put the project outside of a kind of a museum space into this inner city building that we sometimes work in as a space also of refuge or experimentation. So these are the little images of Paulo. And now I want to introduce an installation that is currently at the Javett Art Centre at University of Pretoria. That's why it's called Javett-UP. It's not Javett-UP, but I like UP. And it is a installation of work. You can call them artifacts or objects that were excavated in an area of South Africa now that is called Mapungubwe, which is in the north of the country, where it converges with two other borders of Botswana and Zimbabwe. This is the Mapungubwe Hill. And it's also part of this installation in the Gold Tower of the Javett Art Centre. And And these objects, these gold objects, were excavated by the University of Pretoria, firstly by a man called Van Graan, with a group of other people who mostly white Afrikaner, South Africans in the 1930s during the Great Depression, who were kind of walking the land looking for riches. And they heard through a local that on the hill of Mapungubwe used to live the royals of ancient civilization from around 12,000. And they asked for the way to the hill. The local who showed them the hill was really afraid to do so because it was forbidden. And he managed to show them the hill, but facing backwards. Because there is a legend that if you do point at the hill, you become blind, or you become eaten. You are eaten by wild animals. And indeed, apparently, the men who showed the hill to these people did become blind. So, and this is displayed at Javett-UP, like I said, in the Gold Tower. But it belongs to the state of South Africa, but it was excavated by the University of Pretoria, or the University of Pretoria took over the excavation formally around 1933, also taking to the university vaults human remains. But this collection of gold and also there's a lot of ceramics was hidden from public knowledge, because at the time in which the excavations happened, the Afrikaners were building a narrative of an empty land, and the Africans having not created anything of value. And indeed, there are still some scholarships that believe that these objects were not created by Africans. On this hill, the people who lived here, they were also known as rain makers or rain prayers, which they are still descendants of these people in these areas, and they are led by a rain queen who is called Mojaji. So some of these objects are believed to have been critical in the rain praying. This is in the archive is interpreted as a bowl, but what if it's a hat? You know? And also there's a kind of a very guided access around this collection. We got to know about it in the early 2000s, because and some of the objects are still in the vaults. We have never seen them. And then I started working with the Hartwig Foundation, which is a foundation based in the Netherlands, a commissioning foundation, a new foundation that is also building a museum in Amsterdam. Me and 6 other curators from around the world. And I then spoke to Nolan because of the way that they work to help us with this, with the problems of this collection, which sometimes we cannot speak about. These are some of the objects. The rhino is the single story of the object. So a lot of people look for the rhino. And so Nolan then went on a journey of investigation, even going to Mapungubwe, and also trying to talk to the people who've created a lot of scholarship within the university, up to no avail. This project is titled Specifications for a Reverse Archaeology. Nolan sees this film, so the main project is this film, that the film is about land, and it is a landscape. It is a landscape film. Sorry, I don't have the film itself here. But I will read from Nolan's studio notes and thoughts, and I will start here. Land is the word we use for a category of unfolding acts and actions in time and space. Alongside Santu Mofokeng, Santu comes back again as a reference here. Nolan cites the poets Goropatsi Khositsile, who helps them understand this space-time as a past, present, future. In Mofokeng's Portmanteau, landscape is the practice of trying to view this unfolding space-time. On making the film, Nolan says, in making this landscape film, I encountered a series of expected and unexpected resistances. The straightforward inability to access certain historical documents from the University of Pretoria Museum archives comes as no surprise. In many ways, it mirrors the complex of disciplinary obfuscation and a racialized history of control over the site and its narration. But there are more meaningful resistances that act on us like the force of the wind against the body, moving through the air, an aerodynamic of encounter, a resistance. What I mean is that there are aspects of landscape which demand acknowledgement by not acknowledging them directly. These are things that resist capture by the camera, by language, by representation. For example, the Mapungubwe Hill must not be visited or looked at or spoken of. This non-appearance is the sacred nature of its being. Taba ya Budimo, Badimo, the place of ancestors. What you see when you look at the hill is the desecration of its being. You desacralize it, and so you only see what you have done. The hill relies on our participation for it to remain sacred. This practice of restrained acknowledgement has preserved the so-called artifacts of the site for 1,000 years. It is a form of active care. Archaeology has wrought more destruction to the hill and the bodies and the artifacts and the memory held within the hill than any other mode of encounter in its long history. I realize now that archaeological destruction is also reconstruction, a remaking of the landscape on colonial terms. I also realize I become unconscious participant in that ongoing archaeological project of reconstruction as I visited the site in the footsteps of the first archaeologists, the grave robbers. My presence endorsed an assumption that this landscape is an area of curiosity and discovery. It is not. Nolan mentions that the approach to the landscape is informed by Santu Mofokeng's conceptualization of landscape as portmanteau of two verbs, land and scape, where scape is a verb meaning to view, and land is also a verb which he leaves undefined. The implication is that land is not an object in the Western sense. Instead, it is an action or a set of actions. Land is the word we use for a category of unfolding acts and actions in time and space. Lending, therefore, is freedom. And this is my title of this talk.